It is commonly believed that the most terrifying aspects of the Gulag were the 50-degree below zero frosts, the starvation, and the crushing labor. But the human body can endure incredible physical deprivation. Why then did the most strong-willed people, veterans of wars, break en masse during interrogations where they might not even be beaten? Survivors asserted that the worst part was not what was done to the body, but what was done to the mind. Varlam Shalamov wrote that the most frightening thing was not the frost, but the moment you stopped feeling it. Consciousness had already separated from the body, watching its demise from the outside. So what did this system know about the human psyche that allowed it to crack the will of the most unbreakable? The answer lies in its paradoxical nature, built on two fundamental deceitful principles. The first lie: in a country whose constitution guaranteed the inviolability of the individual, Joseph Stalin, in secret ciphered telegram number 26, Esh dated January 10, 1939, officially authorized torture. Lawlessness became a state-sanctioned method. The second lie: this machine, aimed at total annihilation, practiced the so-called aktirovka, the early release of the dying. This act of feigned humanism was a cynical way to conceal the true mortality statistics. People were simply left to die outside the camp gates. These paradoxes are the key to the system's code. We will uncover its 6 main elements, 6 tools of psychological destruction, and in just 2 minutes we will dissect the first and most fundamental, the technology that turned the basic human need for sleep into a powerful weapon. Why was sleep deprivation more valuable to an experienced NKVD interrogator than a club? Physical pain seems like an obvious lever of pressure. But this is a trap of conventional logic. The system rejected direct violence in favor of a more subtle and brutal method. At first glance, the mechanics of the interrogation method known as the conveyor are simple. The interrogators rotate, but the prisoner does not. The goal seems clear: to exhaust them, to make them more compliant. But one number shatters this illusion. A conveyor session could last up to 20 days. This is no longer an interrogation. It is an industrial process for erasing a personality. Such a duration is not needed to get the truth, but to create a state in which a person will sign anything. The conveyor worked not like a hammer blow, but like soil eroding under constant rain. Every minute without sleep washed away a grain of will until the fertile layer of consciousness was gone completely. This was an attack not on the body, but on the prefrontal cortex. What makes the most complex system in the universe, the human brain, capitulate without a single blow? During sleep deprivation, the prefrontal cortex, the center of will, critical thinking, and decision-making, is the first to shut down. A person loses the ability to analyze and becomes highly suggestible. But the reality is more terrifying. A sleep-deprived brain doesn't just switch off. It begins to generate its own reality. After the 3rd or 4th day without sleep, vivid auditory and visual hallucinations begin. A prisoner might talk to deceased relatives or see the cell walls breathing. In this chaos, the interrogator became the only island of stability, the only voice from the real world. He gained the absolute power to confirm or deny the delusions, becoming the ultimate authority for the tormented mind. After just 72 hours without sleep, a person's cognitive functions are comparable to those of someone heavily intoxicated. Have you ever fallen asleep at work from exhaustion? Now imagine that feeling lasting for 20 days. A person with an iron will, confident in their ability to withstand any physical torment, entered this battle. For the first day, they held on. They used mental exercises, sang silently to themselves, recited poetry. They saw the interrogators as opponents in a duel. But then came the breaking point. They would start seeing their long-dead father at the interrogation, or hearing accusations from their own children. They realized the main enemy was not the interrogator, but their own mind, which the system had turned against them. And so they signed the protocol. Not because they surrendered to the interrogator, but because he promised them 2 hours of sleep. This was not a deal with evil. It was a surrender to basic biology. Interrogator Boris Rodos, known for his cruelty, promised the writer Isaac Babel not a reprieve from execution, but merely 15 minutes of sleep for his signature. But this was not the only threat. The system created a weapon that required neither sleeplessness nor interrogators. A weapon made of silence. So the body is broken. The mind driven to delirium. It seems no more effective way to destroy the will could exist. The conveyor was the foundation of psychological torture. The brute force work that made the mind vulnerable. But the system didn't stop there. The loud and crowded conveyor was replaced by an even more subtle instrument. A weapon that worked on its own. This was a form of torture where the main tool was absolute silence and emptiness. The blow was delivered not through action, but through its complete absence. We are moving from the torture of noise to the torture of silence. From an excess of stimuli to their total absence. And you will see why the second was even more terrifying. How could complete silence and solitude in a punishment cell drive someone mad faster than screams and beatings? This paradox shatters the intuitive notion of torture as an active deed. Here, the weapon is in action. This is not just a solitary cell. It is sensory deprivation. Either total darkness or a never-extinguishing light. An absence of any sounds, smells, or contact. The human brain cannot tolerate a vacuum. Deprived of external data, it begins to generate its own. In absolute silence, a person hears voices. In complete darkness, they see images. The system created conditions in which the brain became the primary enemy. The executioner was not the interrogator, but one's own neurons. An isolated brain is like a limb that has fallen asleep. Deprived of signals, it begins to burn and send false pain impulses. Likewise, a brain deprived of information begins to burn with hallucinations. But the system found a way to control this chaos. Is it possible to literally lose time? For the prisoners, this was a reality. They were fed at random hours, there were no windows, and the light was either constantly on or off. People tried to count their heartbeats to measure minutes, but quickly lost track. They didn't know if it was day or night, what month it was, or what year. This created a sense of an eternal, motionless now. But it destroyed something more. Our personality is a story, a sequence of events. When time disappears, a biography disintegrates into disconnected fragments. A person lost connection, not only with the world, but also with themselves. And that's when the interrogator would appear. He became the sole bearer of information. He could inform them that 10 years had passed, or that a war had begun. And they believed him. In sensory deprivation experiments, volunteers lost track of time after just 48 hours. The prisoner's consciousness became a blank slate. Try to cover your ears and eyes for 30 seconds. Do you feel the discomfort? Now imagine this lasting for months. The first thing to break is not the will, but the capacity for complex thought. A brain that receives no tasks atrophies, like a muscle without exercise. The ability to analyze, plan, and remember disappears. Only basic emotions remain. The ability to distinguish dream from reality vanishes. Yesterday's interrogation, a childhood memory, and a hallucination all become events of the same order. The emptiness becomes so unbearable that it causes almost physical pain. And here, the main psychological shift occurs. Any stimulus,
the creak of a door, the interrogator's voice, becomes a salvation. Interrogation transforms from torture into a welcome event, the only link to the world. The person was ready to do anything for contact. So the person is completely isolated and disoriented. Their brain is attacking itself, and any contact with the outside world is perceived as salvation. In such a state, what could hit them the hardest? The deconstruction of personality is complete. The stage of active programming begins. But the system didn't just write in false confessions. The main tool in the next stage was not threats, but the most cherished human feelings. Love for family, faith in justice, hope for freedom. The system found what was most precious in a person's soul and struck precisely there. The next element in the arsenal did not take away, but gave. It gave hope. And that is precisely why it was the most unbearable. Why was the good interrogator offering a cigarette more dangerous than the bad one who beat you? This is a classic tactic, perfected to an absolute. One interrogator keeps the prisoner in the cold for days. Then he is replaced by another who addresses them by name, gives them hot tea, and talks about their family. This created the illusion of salvation for the tormented person. But after the prisoner began to trust him, the good interrogator would abruptly snatch away that hope, accusing them of insincerity. Or he would simply disappear, and the bad one would return. This unpredictable cycle exhausted the nervous system faster than hunger.
The psyche was like a metal wire. You can pull it for a long time and it will hold. But if you bend it sharply back and forth from hope to despair, the metal quickly fatigues and breaks. The will to resist was paralyzed. But the system found a way to make them break not for themselves, but for those they loved. How can you turn love for one's family into an instrument of torture? The interrogator, an engineer of human souls, behaves calmly, almost sympathetically. He doesn't threaten. He casually quotes a line from a recent letter from the prisoner's wife, showing that all correspondence is under his control. This is the first blow. Then he delivers the decisive one. He doesn't just quote. He distorts the meaning. Your wife writes that your son is ill. She must be worried about you. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to involve her too and send the child to an orphanage. You don't want that, do you? From that moment on, the prisoner was no longer fighting for their principles, but for their family's safety. One can endure fear for oneself. The unbearable feeling of guilt and fear for loved ones broke the most steadfast. Interrogator Lev Schwartzman would often just place photographs of the interrogated person's children on the table and stare at him in silence. What would you do in his place? When a person still refused to give in, the system attacked their last refuge, trust. An informant, an NKVD agent playing the role of a fellow sufferer, was placed in the cell with the stubborn prisoner. He would gain their trust, share his own story, and become the only person they could talk to. But he didn't just gather information. He gave false hope of amnesty, told fabricated news, and nudged them toward the correct thoughts. The culmination was the moment the prisoner saw his only friend in the interrogator's office, or heard his most private words read from the interrogation protocol. This blow destroyed the very ability to trust people. According to some data, up to 30% of cellmates could be informants. The mind was assaulted. Feelings were turned into weapons. Trust was annihilated. But the person still had something left. Their past. And the system came for it. So the mind is shattered by deprivation. Feelings are turned against them. And trust is destroyed by betrayal. What else was left for a person? The final bastion. A sense of self-worth. Pride in their past life, their achievements, their status as a general, a scientist, or a poet. The awareness of who you are, based on your biography. The system knew that as long as a person remembered who they were and respected themselves for it, they could not be completely broken. Therefore, a special set of tools was created to destroy this as well. Until now, we have spoken of invisible tortures. Now we will see how the most mundane, visible actions, shaving, changing clothes, using dismissive forms of address, became weapons of mass psychological destruction. Why was it so important to a decorated general, accustomed to unquestioning obedience, how he was addressed in his cell? Against the threat of execution, this seems trivial.
But this is precisely where the system struck the first blow against identity. Our sense of self is largely defined by external attributes: name, status, clothing. They are a constant reminder to ourselves and others of who we are. The system used this knowledge as a weapon, forcibly shaving their head, stripping them of their surname and replacing it with a number, addressing them only with dismissive familiarity, and issuing a dirty, shapeless uniform. Each such act was a small but precise blow to their self-esteem. The goal was simple: to make the person forget who they had been. If you are no longer Professor Ivanov, but enemy of the people, number 734, your past pride ceases to function. The personality was erased like writing from a blackboard. Shaving erased the face. A number replaced the name. A uniform stripped their status. Once the board is clean, you can write anything on it. The person was deprived of their name. But that was not enough. The next step was aimed at depriving them of their status as a human being altogether. How far could the system go in its quest to humiliate? At first, prisoners were forced to perform meaningless labor, moving stones from one place to another. They were publicly insulted and deprived of basic hygiene. This created the illusion of a comprehensible, albeit cruel, prison routine. But the archives hide what was called the torture of humiliation. High-ranking military officers, accustomed to commanding thousands, or world-renowned scientists were forced to crawl on the floor for hours and bark like dogs. This was a theater of the absurd with a very specific goal: symbolic dehumanization. When a person, pushed to their limit, obeyed and performed this command, an internal breakdown occurred. With their own body, they agreed to their new, animalistic status. Their will to resist based on human dignity was destroyed. Marshal Blucher, a hero of the Civil War, was forced by interrogators to kneel for hours until his legs swelled beyond recognition. This was done to physically destroy the image of the invincible commander in his own mind. We have seen how this worked in theory. Now history will show what it looked like in practice. In the first few days, many of the arrested were certain it was all a mistake. Imagine a high-ranking party official. Upon landing in prison, he is absolutely convinced that the misunderstanding will soon be resolved. He demands to be addressed formally, refers to his services to the party, and threatens the interrogators with his connections in the Kremlin. He is still living in his past reality, where his status means something. But day by day, he was methodically processed. First, he was shaved and his clothes were changed. Then, they stopped calling him by his last name. He was forced to clean the latrine alongside common criminals. His confidence gave way to confusion, and then to a quiet, hopeless apathy. The final scene. The interrogator orders him to do something humiliating, and he complies without a word. There is no longer any pride or fight in his eyes. He has accepted the role forced upon him. The 4 stages of the fall: confidence, confusion, apathy, submission.
His personality has been erased. He is one man against a machine. But was he truly alone? The person is deprived of sleep, information, hope, and dignity. It seems all lines of defense have been breached. The system purposefully destroyed their inner world, their self-esteem, and their connection to the past. This was an attack on the individual consciousness. But the prisoner, even in a cell, had one last resource: other people. Comrades in misfortune with whom they could exchange a glance or a crumb of bread. The solidarity of victims was the last bastion of resistance. And the system struck at it. It released the most terrifying virus of the GULAG, the virus of total distrust. The next tool is a technology that forced victims to destroy one another. The system found a way to make a prisoner fear their cellmate more than their interrogator. And this method was terrifyingly simple. How did the system ensure that victims feared each other more than their executioners? This contradicts the instinct to unite against a common enemy. The answer is not in coercion. The system created an economy of betrayal. For informing, one could receive an extra ration of bread or a transfer to lighter work. Amidst total starvation, the choice between loyalty and survival became a daily moral torture. This turned everyone into a potential traitor. The system worked like a drop of ink in a glass of water. At first, it's unnoticeable, but it quickly stains everything, making it impossible to distinguish poison from pure water. The price of betrayal was frighteningly low: 100 or 150 grams of bread above the starvation ration. The system forced the prisoners to police each other. When everyone sees a snitch in their neighbor, external surveillance is unnecessary. Imagine yourself in a cell where a piece of bread could cost a comrade's life. On which day does your hunger become stronger than your loyalty? But the system created a paradox in which even a principled refusal to inform led to the same result. Silence became as suspicious as betrayal. The interrogator recruited not only with promises, but also with blackmail, threats to family, worsening the case. Many signed cooperation agreements under torture simply to end the suffering, with no intention of informing on anyone. But proof wasn't needed. The mere fact that a prisoner was called for a conversation and returned alive became a stigma. Cellmates didn't know what was discussed. Did he sign a denunciation or withstand the torture? The seed of suspicion was planted. If he wasn't touched for a few days after that, the suspicion grew. He must have made a deal. The system turned the presumption of innocence into a presumption of guilt. In this atmosphere of paranoia, any action was evidence. Talking to a neighbor, you're prying, staying silent, you're hiding that. You're an informant. This diabolical logic destroyed real lives. What happens when the virus of distrust infects a friendship? Two old comrades arrested in the same case meet in a cell. They vow to stick together, to trust only each other. This is their final line of defense. At first, their alliance seems unbreakable. They share their rations, support each other. But then one of the friends, let's call him A, starts being called for interrogations more often. He returns beaten, but silent. Suddenly, a guard gives A an extra ladle of gruel. A day later, he is moved to a bunk by the window. For his friend B, these details become poison. He sees not the result of torture, but payment for betrayal. He could smell the cooked cabbage from his friend's bowl, a smell he had missed for weeks. The trap had sprung. B, tormented by suspicion, writes a denunciation of A himself to preempt him. The friendship is destroyed. The system's plan is realized without a single order. The person is now completely alone. But the system would not stop there. Its final goal, to make a person stop believing in themselves. What do we have? The prisoner has been through 5 circles of hell. Their body is exhausted by insomnia. Their mind is disoriented. Their emotions are burned out. Their dignity is trampled, and their faith in people is destroyed. They have been turned into an isolated, broken shell. But this was only the preparation. The conveyor and information starvation deprived the brain of its ability to think critically. The manipulation of hope and the murder of status destroyed personal pillars. The atomization of the collective annihilated external support. The system methodically severed everything that connected the person to reality. Its goal was not to break, but to reassemble them. A broken and lonely person. The ideal material for reprogramming. The system needed not just a confession. It needed the prisoner's sincere belief in their own guilt. And this brings us to the last and most terrifying element of the arsenal. The technology that made a person remember crimes they never committed. How do you make a person genuinely remember something that never happened? This isn't hypnosis, but a cold technology of distorting the past. It began not with a big lie, but with a small truth. The interrogator didn't immediately demand a confession of espionage. He would spend hours questioning them about their real biography, then find minor inconsistencies. You said you met your comrade in May, but our records show it was April. Are you trying to deceive the investigation? Exhausted by the conveyor, which could last up to 20 days, the prisoner would agree to the correction. This was the first step toward losing control of their own story. Protocol by protocol, the interrogator layered distortions, creating a new but logical biography. He would offer help. Perhaps you weren't discussing the weather, but politics. Sign here. The line between the real and the imposed blurred. And there came a moment when the prisoner, in a desperate attempt to end the torture, would start inventing details themselves. Yes, I think I did pass on information. It was an act of co-creation with the executioner. But what could break someone who withstood even this? To break the unbreakable, the system struck at their sole source of meaning. Our steadfast individual had been through it all. He endured the conveyor, didn't go mad in isolation, and wasn't broken by humiliation or betrayal.
He clung to one thought. I am innocent, and my loved ones know it. This was his last bastion. The interrogator lays out protocols of his friends' interrogations on the table, where they confess to joint anti-Soviet activities. The steadfast one sees their signatures but holds on. They couldn't withstand the torture. Then the interrogator pulls out his final weapon. With false sympathy, he reads a forged letter from the man's daughter. Father, I read in the newspapers about your crimes. As a Komsomol member, I renounce you, an enemy of the people. This breaks him. If even his closest loved one believes the lie, what is there to fight for? His truth no longer has value. He picks up the pen and signs everything. But why did the system need this victory, when it could have simply forged the signature? Why spend months processing a person who would be executed anyway? This paradox reveals the system's global objective. On paper, the GULAG was a corrective system. Therefore, the sincere repentance of an enemy was the ultimate proof of its wisdom. This transformed the process from a farce into a moralizing spectacle. But the real goal was not correction, but self-justification. When the old Bolsheviks confessed to espionage at the open Moscow trials, it legitimized the terror. If even heroes turned out to be traitors, then the terror was justified. Stalin's ciphered telegram of January 10th, 1939, which authorized torture, was illogical. Step. The system needed the victim's belief in their own guilt, so that the executioners themselves could believe in their own righteousness. The interrogator was transformed from a sadist into an engineer of human souls. Thus, the 6 elements were woven into a single machine. So the code is cracked. We have traced the path from the first sleepless night to the signature under fabricated crimes. We have seen how the system deprived of sleep, isolated, attacked feelings, destroyed self-esteem, shattered trust, and rewrote memory. But this is not a list of tortures. It is a technological process where the elements amplified one another many times over. Sleep deprivation made the psyche vulnerable to information starvation. Isolation made manipulations with hope tens of times more effective. And a person deprived of reason and connections could not resist the assault on their memory. We have seen not a collection of atrocities, but a coherent, well-thought-out technology. It was a perfect storm designed to annihilate personality. These 6 elements worked like the growth stages of a carnivorous plant. The first weakened the soil, the next entwined the stem, and the last bore the poisonous fruit. Now that we know how the system works, the main question arises. Is it possible to protect one's consciousness from such an influence? The answer to this question lies in synergy. The first 3 elements worked as a single mechanism to dismantle basic defenses. The conveyor was not just torture, but a surgical shutdown of the prefrontal cortex, the center of will. After 48 hours without sleep, the brain switched to biological survival mode, losing its capacity for critical thought. On this prepared ground, information starvation was laid.
For an exhausted mind, isolation was not rest but fuel for madness. The brain, deprived of external data, erased the line between reality and hallucination. And then the third blow was struck. The manipulation of hope. For a person whose mind was already delirious, a fake letter from their family became an overwhelmingly powerful stimulus. The emotional roller coaster from the illusion of rescue to despair finally burned out the will. This triple blow created the ideal victim, cognitively disoriented and emotionally defenseless. The body and mind were prepared. Now the system moved on to destroying the personality. After dismantling the basic defenses, the machine attacked identity itself. The murder of status was not mere humiliation. When professors were forced to crawl and bark for hours, the system was erasing their past. A general or a poet became a nobody, a number. This destroyed the inner core based on self-respect. Simultaneously, an attack was launched on external supports through the atomization of the collective. When a person could no longer rely on their I, the system took away their ability to rely on we. Widespread informing turned the cell into a terrarium where everyone feared everyone else. The synergy of these 2 methods created an absolute vacuum. The person was no longer Professor Ivanov, and no longer one of us. They became an isolated unit, an atom of fear. The personality was erased, an empty shell remained. And it was into this void that the system began to write a new reality. Upon this prepared personality, stripped of all support, the final element was laid. The distortion of the past. This was no longer about breaking but programming. For a person with no connection to reality, to themselves or to others, the interrogator's version became the only available truth. And here, the 2 circles we spoke of at the very beginning close. Stalin's secret cipher telegram transformed this entire 6-step process from lawlessness into an official state method. This proves we are dealing not with excesses, but with a deliberate technology. And the aktorovka, the release of the dying, was not humane, but a cynical, statistical manipulation. To hide the scale of mortality from this technology. The psychological terror was not chaos, but a systemic and terrifyingly rational machine. Strong people broke because the system attacked not their bodies, but the very operating system of their consciousness. In 1 minute, we will ask you the main question that summarizes everything you have seen. We have seen 2 extremes of suffering. On one hand, inhuman physical pain, hunger, cold, beatings. This is a comprehensible, animalistic evil aimed at the body. On the other hand, we have analyzed 6 sophisticated technologies that leave no bruises but destroy the personality from within. This is an invisible evil, aimed at the mind. Now that you have seen all this, we will ask you the main question. What do you believe is the more terrifying and effective weapon for the complete destruction of a human being? Write just one word in the comments below this video. Pain or manipulation. No explanations. Just your choice. Let's see what conclusion we have all come to. And most importantly, let's discuss it.